Anti-Americanism has infected the American homeland in the worst way. But instead of it being as outwardly brazen and bold as it was in the past, it has become more sinister and more hidden. It has germinated into different kinds of behaviors and habits that make it not very easy to identify and call out when it sprouts up. And if we're going to actually sustain America as a civilization and defend the virtues of the character of America, we must learn how to identify, understand, and critique these new forms of anti-Americanisms, I call them, since they are multiple in terms of how they are, and we must defend our country from them by using a strong civic and moral posture and through the use of a rigorous philosophy. And in this video, my friends, I'm going to walk through these different anti-Americanisms, and I'm going to show you how to defend them with a strong posture towards truth and towards our civilization. Before we do that, my friends, I hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watson. You are watching Pensive Politics. This is a civic conservative project geared towards the restoration and the revival of the American ethos within our current civilization. Thank you guys so much for being here. Now, please enjoy the video. So, before I can actually talk about this intelligibly, I must discuss what it actually means to be an American and also what Americanism actually means as well on a conceptual level. And I can't discuss either of these two things, my friends, without first discussing foundations. The problem that I've seen, my friends, is that so many people, when it comes to talking about what it means to be an American or what America is, they describe the proposition in terms of positions instead of actually beginning with foundation. A position is simply a particular belief you may hold on a particular issue, but when it is divorced from a foundation, that position cannot be sustained by anything except pure sentiment. And pure sentiment, unmoored from reason, pure sentiment, unmoored from the realities of the observable world, is not enough to sustain a country. It's not enough to even sustain a strong mind geared towards truth, much less is it even enough to defend a position. So, any position that someone holds has to be anchored to something that goes beyond that position. But so many people, since it is so easy to identify a position and say, this is where I stand, therefore, this is what America is, it is so easy to do that. They choose the path of least resistance. But the path of least resistance, my friends, does not build a civilization. The path of least resistance does not actually fight anti-Americanism, and nor does it edify or enlighten. America is the embodiment and the logical result of the best habits and beliefs of the Enlightenment. It is the fulfillment of the Enlightenment dream, and we ought to treat it like that by talking about it in a way that goes towards the eternal and not the local. That is the only way we can do that. And so when people talk about America in terms of positions, they'll say that America, well, to be an American, you means that you're patriotic or you believe in country, but all of these things, patriotism, my friends, patriotism without a foundation is incoherent, because patriotism needs to be directed towards something. And if it's directed towards the country, what is the country founded upon? And what does that mean? What are the implications, moral, civic, and philosophical, for the foundations of the country? And to answer these questions, to extract what it means to be an American and also extract the meaning of Americanism and put it into our discourse here, we must go towards the founding documents that set the country into motion legally. And I think the first few lines of the Declaration of Independence actually kind of sums up what it actually means to be an American and what Americanism, therefore, is. Before I read that, I must say to you, Americanism, my position is that Americanism is, number one, having a correct civic and moral posture that is fueled by belief, and that belief is fueled by a worldview. So in other words, Americanism is not simply holding a position. Americanism is certainly having a position, but it's a position connected to a certain way that we orient ourselves towards society, that's the civic, and that way we orient ourselves towards the moral. The moral is what sustains society. It is the biggest mistake to assume that society comes before the moral, because society does not have anything to guard it if we do not pursue justice, if we do not pursue fidelity, if we do not pursue veracity, if we do not pursue goodwill amongst our neighbors, if we do not pursue charitability. Therefore, the moral is that spring from which the society sprouts up and emerges forth into our world. And so therefore, that's the posture part. The worldview is actually what sustains the posture. And the worldview is tied up with a series of beliefs and understandings of what it means to be an American, tied to general truths. And those general truths define the essence of what it means to be an American. I will explain more after I read this. So, the first line of the Declaration of Independence says the following, quote, "When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with one another, and to assume among them the powers of the earth." What does that mean? We'll get to that. Powers of the earth, and the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. What in the world does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. To assume upon yourself the powers of the earth is not merely to posture yourself towards a rebellious position towards your former master, which is exactly what the colonial Americans did. No, it is actually to tap into the truths that are baked into human nature, that are baked into the observable world, and then use them in a way that only you, uniquely as a human being, only you, uniquely as a moral agent, as a sociable creature, as a creature made and refined by society, actually can. The powers of the earth are the moral faculties that move our thinking into conduct that sustains society, that move our thinking into a way that allows us to refine ourselves. The powers of the earth is our ability to have a conscience, a well-formed conscience that tells us what is right and wrong. It's our ability to have a good moral sense, which before we even think about what's right and wrong, they come to us as impulses. It's our ability to have a culture of the mind where our reason becomes the handmaiden of our moral sense and not the enemy of emotion, but the emotion is subordinate beneath a rational standard. Therefore, the emotion does not tyrannize us. The emotion gears us and energizes us towards society. And then from this births formation. So in other words, my friends, the powers of the earth is the use of the faculties that quite literally make us moral agents and therefore allow us to make moral claims in society. Therefore, when the colonists said, "King George, you are taking our property. King George, you are quartering troops in our house. King George, you are violating the law of nature," they're not appealing to some custom created by a government. They're not appealing to some nicety. They're not appealing to some blank outrage that has no foundation, some hollow principle. They are appealing to the very nature of human beings that allow us to exist in society, and from that flows the legitimacy for political force. So to be an American is to have a disposition towards the truth that affirms the truth of human nature, that affirms the importance of man as a moral agent, that affirms the importance of character formation, and then the connection between character formation and our conduct in the world, which then informs what kind of government we have. That is what it means to be an American. It is a worldview connected up with belief, posture, formation, and then action. It is a worldview of a duty-bound person that is geared towards a particular civilizational character that only America had. Almost every single writer during the time of the founding understood that what America was doing was not just exceptional in the way we mean it today, and we're so special. No, it was exceptional on a civilizational level, because it rejected castes, it rejected status as a moral standard, it rejected familial lines and blood as the force of legitimacy for social institutions. It put within the grasp of man the mantle and mandate of forming his society on the terms that are correct, that he can understand as a rational creature, and then hastening that forth with his fellow countrymen through a shared civic bond. This is why virtue is required for our citizenry. This is why virtue is required. But to have virtue does not sustain itself. What sustains virtue? Well, virtue is the doing good to others in society, but you have to have a society before you can have virtue. Therefore, our duties towards justice, our duties towards fidelity, that is what sustains society enough for virtue to come into place. As an American, you are not merely someone that bears a legal status upon your name. You are not merely someone that has been born upon a certain plot of soil that exists on the North American continent, that exists within certain borders. You are not merely someone who has a genetic connection to the land through familial lineage. As Americans, we are fundamentally the manifestation of all of the virtues of the New World. We are fundamentally what it actually means to have a society, self-governing, moral agents working towards the constant refinement of their lives and their civilization. We are the embodiment of what it means to have the creative impulse of man actually forwarded by our institutions and not shunned by them and put beneath the banners and the tyrannical standards of old institutions. As Americans, we are the fulfillment of the Enlightenment. We are the engines of progress in the world, not just progress in the economic sense, because economic progress fundamentally comes from moral progress. As an American, we are an example. These are not hollow rhetorical tones. These are the empirical understandings of what it means to actually exist in this country and be tied to the foundation. The foundations are the laws of nature that sustain a correct posture, that sustain correct conduct, and then allow us to hold those as standards over our statesmen, over our citizens, and over those in society that might seek to destroy them. That is what it means to be an American. Legality does not establish Americanism. Legality is process, and process can shift with the ages. But if America was built upon the powers of the earth, and the powers of the earth are not this mystical thing, they are the authorities that all of us as moral agents can tap into within our nature, within the nature of reality, that justify things, that refine things. And that means the standard can't change, and therefore it can't be just process, because process changes. That's what Americanism means. It's a worldview. It's a belief. It's posture. It's formation. It's duty. And then it's a direction towards the future of your country. And so, now that we've got that out of the way, what is anti-Americanism? Well, anti-Americanism, we're going to flow from those foundations, is any action, belief, sentiment, or mentality that disrupts the moral civic posture that is endemic to Americanism, that belongs to Americanism, any action, habit, belief, or mentality that would seek to misapply the basis of what it means to be an American to a different sort of foreign foundation, one that is not rooted in the moral, but is instead rooted in the parochial and the artificial and the general made. It is not, see, the problem is a lot of people believe that anti-Americanism is mere hostility. It's not. Because hostility by itself is a neutral principle. Hostility gains a character when it goes towards a particular direction. So, it's not the question of being hostile. This is what the old worldview of anti-Americanism is in the 80s and 70s. We had an understanding that there was a communist plague in Europe. And therefore, to defeat this communist plague, we had to identify them as anti-American. Well, guess what? That's not going to work anymore. Because not only is the communist plague no longer over there, it's within our country. That's why I said it's in our homeland. That's not the only form of anti-Americanism, but it's in our homeland. There's also many different forms of that hostility that even our own countrymen, some of them who claim not to be communist, some who actually claim to be pro-American, hold these distinctively anti-American beliefs. And so, there are 5 categories of anti-Americanism, my friends, and walk through this with me so we can get through this and we can understand this. The first category is hostility towards countrymen. I'm going to subdivide this into 2 separate categories. I'm going to subdivide this into this explicit and the subtle. And I'll explain what this actually means in a moment. The second category is a poisoning of the American intellect, which corporate press and influencers that hijack your passions and drive you towards spectacle and away from edification and substance, they actually trade and traffic in this particular kind of Americanism quite a lot. And there's the defiance of sovereignty via foreign influence. This is a topic that is oftentimes selectively discussed at the detriment of all of our interests as Americans in preserving the sovereignty of our nations from foreign influence. Oftentimes when you hear this topic discussed, it'll be discussed by pointing out particular nations, whether it be Israel or Qatar, but the wide range of foreign influences within America, ones that are less volatile within the competition to discuss, are rarely discussed. You wonder why? Because opportunism moves this form of anti-Americanism into force. Substance and conviction are left out of the question, so we'll discuss this. There's also politicians and statesmen derelicting their duty by behaving as more like performers than they do statesmen. That's a big form of anti-Americanism. And the last form of anti-Americanism is performative patriotism. When people mimic the affection that one ought to have towards their country, but with behind the mask, behind the affection is actually hollow. There's nothing there. And if there's nothing there, it cannot be sustained beyond a moment. So you have the tyranny of the moment ruling over the minds of the hollow patriots, and therefore dispossessing America of the affection it deserves, therefore being anti-American because it attacks the posture that our country needs to be sustained as a civilization. Do you see how this works, guys? Many of us have been looking at outward hostility and asking the question, well, this person professes a hate for America, they're anti-American, but we don't understand there's many different forms of this that many of us may even partake in out of anger, out of despair. Anti-Americanism, my friends, is a mutative force. And so when it goes undetected, it can become normalized. And if it becomes normalized, many of you will have the wrong perceptions about what it means to be anti-American, and your perceptions will give birth to habits that actually sow anti-American within your heart. That's why it's not enough to understand America merely as a country, but instead as a worldview, fundamentally as a country propositioned upon a worldview, not merely an idea, but a place, an idea, and a worldview combined together that link up and hook up and actually create what we know as America, more than it is to understand America merely as a place, or merely as the place where you were born or part of land. Because if you understand America merely as a place where you were born, you will not be able to identify what it means to be anti-American beyond certain moments or beyond certain things. Right? And that will limit your perspective gradually. So anti-Americanism is that mentality, that habit, that belief, that force that disrupts our civic posture, rejects the worldview we should have as Americans, and then also leads us against our country in a subtle way. So hostility towards countrymen. There are a lot of videos out there that I've noticed of people making videos that singing that Americans or narcissistic, or America is this, or America is that, just bad-mouthing America. They're using the current economic crisis that we're facing in 2025 as a means by which to delegitimize the nature and character of the country. And so the subtle versions of this, however, would be, I would say, people who have their own idea of America built within their imaginations. Some people will say, well, my America means this. America is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant country, and any other view of America is incorrect. On the other extreme, you'll have someone that says, well, America is a multicultural society, and if you're not multicultural, you are evil. On the other idea, you'll have that America was built by slaves, and therefore we have to understand it as the fruit, as the seed of the sweat and tears of slaves. All these perspectives are subtly anti-American, because they are reducing the nature and definition of the country to a version crafted in their imagination using disparate historical details that go under no overarching narrative. See, it's not, to understand the nature of anything, you cannot use disparate details, either using its worst parts or its best parts to build a narrative, because you will not have a complete picture, and you will then have an incomplete category, and an incomplete category can do nothing but give you half of a situation. It cannot actually allow you to establish authoritatively a definition, and every single perspective I just named does that when they try to superimpose this half-baked idea of America upon America. Then you have, I think, other forms of subtle anti-Americanism, where you have people that conflate the government with the nation. The nation is the people and the community and the society that sustains the country, and the government derives legitimacy from that. But a lot of folks will say America has bombed a lot of countries and America has caused a lot of its own problems. You're conflating me as a nation man, as a citizen, with my government. And that is a massive, massive, massive problem, massive error that seems so easy because we have an abstract view of what it means to be an American, an abstract view of what it means to have a country. And by the way, this abstract view is the same view that allows people who think globally and not locally to justify the erosion of national sovereignty in the name of some faux moral good. This is the same view. It's the same view that let the UN come to America and say, if you repeal universal health care, which is not just morally unsustainable, in fact, that it deprives people of the care of their own ability to go seek out care, and it presumes care as a public right as opposed to a private right, both grave errors, but also is a financial catastrophe. They say if you repeal universal health care, this will be a human rights violation and we'll have to intervene. The UN did this in 2017, literally did this. The same perspective that says America is the great evil because its government does bad things is the same perspective that says America has no sovereignty because on a universal level we weigh this issue. You can't do that. You can't do that because nations are not abstractions. Nations are real places built upon certain things, depending on what the nation is. In America is a very unique nation in that respect, because we're not built upon lineage or familial tradition. We're built literally upon a worldview and posture. So again, you have to understand local, you have to understand sovereignty in order to sustain that. So these are the sort of hostility towards countrymen in terms of reframing what the nature of America is, and also most importantly, in terms of attacking your countrymen because you perceive them to lack aptitude in some kind of way. These are sort of overgeneralizations that lead towards a kind of negative sentiment towards country. Another, I think, again, example of anti-Americanism is the poisoning of the American intellect. We know that influencers in social media, a lot of them they derive their success from hijacking the dopamine receptors within your mind. That's the scientific explanation. But the moral explanation is that they take advantage of ill-formed hearts. What am I talking about? An ill-formed heart. See, our passions, our sentiments, our understanding of right and wrong, our approval, our disapproval, all of it emerges from one source, and that is the heart. The heart is the engine. It is the beginning. It is the possessor of moral sentiment. It is the source from which all of our moral understanding, properly, strictly, and substantially understood, comes from. But when the heart is torn up and is misunderstood and misapplied and is abused, our sentiments can become our enemies as opposed to the helpmates of forming the right posture and forming the right conduct. So therefore, we need to have a culture of the heart. What is culture? Culture are the habits, customs, and norms of a people in a particular place, particular time. So we need to have a moral culture within our internal selves that are the habits, customs, and norms, all moral, that inform and adjust and govern our passions and sentiments towards the right end. So, but in a culture that is so external, that it worries so much about status and numbers and that external validation, there is no room for a culture of the heart. So what happens? The influencers come in, the corporate press comes in, and they take advantage of our passions and our appetites, use them against us to enrich themselves, to keep up their systems, while the moral system and the moral architecture that actually sustains a people crashes. Well, when you do this, you can't have a civic posture or a moral posture that allows us to be good citizens. Therefore, it is anti-American. I would say, my friends, just being frank, and this is not a reason to despair, the vast majority of the cultural landscape in America is anti-American if you take my definition seriously. Because it is weaponized against the sound formation of the people. And so, not only do they simply weaponize our appetites, they weaponize our appetites towards spectacle and towards drama. Some of the biggest kinds of content that gets views on Twitter, on YouTube, wherever, are content involving influencers fighting. Some of the biggest kind of content within the corporate media days in the 90s was Jerry Springer, it was Maury Povich, it was all these Carrie Lake and Sally Jesse Raphael, who was actually good, okay, but she became dramatized eventually. All these things which depicted the tearing down of societal bonds. Therefore, the destruction of fidelity. Fidelity is not just the bonds of loyalty, but they're literally the glue that holds society and institutions together. Those shows depicted that every single day within the American mind, that corrupted the moral imagination and then put within a sentiment within Americans a kind of despair towards their own countrymen. Some people would even say, watching those shows, I can't believe my country's like this. Out of 330 million people, you're gonna let that be the representation of your country? This is what happens. It's a big issue. So again, when you hold appetite above reason in that way, and you weaponize it, you get a vicious kind of poisoning of the intellect, and that does not posture ourselves well towards sustaining the habits necessary for a civilization. Then you have the defiance of sovereignty via foreign influence. And so I think one thing here is that when we talk about foreign influence, it's oftentimes very selective, my friends. You guys know what I'm talking about. People who have an agenda against Israel will say Israel is the great evil. People that have an agenda against Qatar will say Qatar is the great evil. People have an agenda, but we don't actually understand is that if we have a consistent approach to foreign influence, we will not take any kind of partiality towards it. We will instead have have a consistent kind of standard that says all foreign influence, no matter where it comes from, no matter if we like it or we don't like it, All foreign influence is destructive to a nation's sovereignty. And not only that, but all foreign influence violates the law of nations. No, not the UN's charters. No, not the globalized Atlantic Council's diktats. No, not what the G7 wants. That's not the law of nations. That's all pretend stuff that has literally, that's pretend stuff that killed the body of moral understanding and then reached down into it and just tore out all of its entrails, and now is trying to remake those entrails into being governing standards. It is an imitation. It is false. It is a false thing. The law of nations is quite simply the law of nature which governs conduct between individual people applied between states, because states, nation states, countries are merely collections of people interacting in the global world, and therefore they are bound by the same moral obligations and they're bound by the same moral customs necessarily that the law of nature prescribes for us on the ground level. And that maintains that the law of nations cannot exist. Nations cannot exist without having a kind of sovereignty. And sovereignty is not simply independence. People think it is. No. Nope. Sovereignty is not merely independence. If you think it is, I would encourage you, please revise your thoughts. Please. Christian's asking, so please. Sovereignty is the ability to self-correct on a moral level. Because if a nation is sovereign, it can make its own laws. But laws are not made in a vacuum. Laws are made according to two things, ideally, not all the time, but ideally, according to moral standards set forth by the natural law that go towards the refinement and preservation of society, not the domination, control, or erosion of society, and also according to the needs of the people. So the civil law, which is that law that flows from those two things, the civil law is sustained by sovereignty. And therefore, the people on a ground level, also by virtue of sovereignty, have the ability to refine themselves morally, to build a culture of the heart, to build a culture of the mind, to build a strong moral sense, and then act within their society when there are less parties, less externalities involved. So not just does sovereignty keep us independent, it keeps us the ability to self-govern. Without sovereignty, we can't self-govern ourselves morally. So therefore, any foreign influence disrupts the ability, not just of our geopolitical sovereignty, but it also disrupts the ability of the citizen to exist in the rightly formed way. And that therefore causes a perceptional shift, a misperceptional shift that prejudices the local, prejudices the homeland in favor of some far-off country. This is why you have these influencers taking money from Russia, Qatar, Israel, because they are prejudiced in their thinking against the country, because the law of nations is not being observed. Okay. So, this means, if I'm right, and I think I am, I could be wrong, tell me in the comments, this has to mean, okay, that it's not enough to talk about Israeli influence when Qatar has been in our education system since the 1980s, directing it, funding research grants as a way to exercise soft power. It's not enough to talk about Qatari influence when Israel, through its various arms in the country, whether it be AIPAC or others, has sophisticated lobbying techniques that make a lot of American politicians believe it is their duty to maintain a certain kind of posture loaded towards Israel. But it's not enough to talk about Israeli influence when you have China that is quite literally, we have a massive trade deficit within one of our largest trade partners, who is known to steal intellectual property secrets, who is known to spy on Americans, to run honeypot operations on our own congressmen. When we have China entrenching itself every single day in our country, Trump literally just allowed NVIDIA, a Chinese country, to make our chips for us. And it's not enough to talk about Chinese influence when you have Saudi Arabia investing over $500 billion to the tunes of $1 trillion in American economy. All of this, my friends, is foreign influence. All of this erodes the preconditions of the correct posture that we require to be good moral agents in our society and to have a sovereign society. And all of this is a threat. And anyone that tries to pit one of these against the other without recognizing consistently that it's all a threat are people who have an agenda of antagonism, and not an agenda of formation or an agenda of moral conviction. Okay, and I've kind of already mentioned about the performance aspect, politicians as performers. When you have politicians who generate so many different headlines and so many different attention-grabbing moments by acting crazy within a congressional hearing, or by saying the most outlandish things, right? And when you have people that emulate that, people in the culture, and I don't name names, but I just think you guys already know what I'm talking about. When you have all this stuff happening, what perspective does this give towards the duty of the statesman? The duty of the statesman is quite clearly is to tend towards good governance in their actions. That's all it is. To tend towards good governance. Good governance is the preservation of civil society by abiding by strict moral standards like justice, the protection of contracts, property, promises, covenants, possessions. The fidelity, which is the bonds of loyalty that tie together a society, institutions, and its members. Veracity, which is not just the pursuit of truth, but also the whole suite of habits and activities that help us understand and posture ourselves towards the truths. All these different principles are a defined moral order, and moral order is what keeps physical order from tending towards the destruction, the corrosion, or the domination of the society, and therefore towards the destruction or towards the bad posturing, towards the ill health of the citizenry. And so, when you lack this, my friends, when you fundamentally lack this within your politicians, you lack the restraints moral order is placing upon political order, and that can get you to a place where your political order becomes deviant, where power becomes unhinged from its correct hinges, from its correct limits, and where it becomes an instrument of will rather than a servitor of moral standards. And that is what's happening when politicians perform and act passionate, and they're more passionate than they are substantive. You see, throughout this video I've been passionate, but all my passion is geared towards making arguments that I think anyone, when they think through them, can understand. At least if you don't agree with them, understand their merit. Spectacle is the enemy of duty. Hollowness of heart, posture towards action, which leads to spectacle, is the enemy of moral conviction. Irony, when taken beyond its proper limits, is the enemy of well-formed mind. Because when you're ironic about everything, you can believe nothing truly. Because everything is trivial, everything is negotiable, nothing is sacred, nothing is convicting, nothing is settled. And then performative patriotism. When people say, I love America, or I love this country, it's easy to say words. But love is not just having a strong feeling towards somebody. Love is willing the highest good for that person. Love is becoming consumed and obsessed with that person's refinement and betterment. Love is taking all the qualities of a person and imagining them on the highest level of potential that you have the ability within a well-ordered moral imagination to conjure up. That's what love is. So love doesn't just require words or affection. Love requires action, and it requires character formation on the part of the lover and the person who is loved. So if you love your country, that then therefore means that you simply saying words or simply being outraged or showing that through passion is not enough. You have to show that through conduct. And if your conduct is not rightly ordered according to the right moral principles and the right civic and moral posture, your conduct does not reflect love. It reflects licentiousness. Your conduct does not reflect love. It reflects a kind of rebelliousness. It reflects a kind of deceit. And deceit cannot sustain love. Deceit can only sustain infatuation within a moment, but that dam breaks eventually. Performative patriotism is one of the biggest forms of anti-Americanism because it does erode our ability to posture ourselves correctly towards our country. So, my friends, before I close, we have to ask the question, what is the source of anti-Americanism? The source of anti-Americanism, my friends, is simply irreverence. Irreverence. The loosing of man from all of his limits, moral and civic in this case, which then allows his thinking to go into places that are ignorant, and his desire becomes malformed. See, it's the combination between intention and ill-formed desire that creates anti-Americanism, because it creates the habits and the beliefs that are explicitly anti-American as we've defined that. So it's a corruption of the moral imagination. Your moral imagination is where you work out the wide range of things that are right and good to be done, the wide range of things that accord to rightful conduct, and then you do them in the real world. That's your moral imagination. And so your moral imagination then, of course, influences your taste, because your moral imagination resides where your creativity is, which also is in your imagination. So therefore, there's a taste formation. So not only will your conduct, when you have the right civic and moral posture, my friends, not only will your conduct that you work with your hands will change, but your taste will change. What you like to watch, what music you listen to, that's all going to change and conform to a certain standard. But when you have a corrected moral imagination, it becomes very easy to give into despair, to nihilism, to cynicism, to performativity, towards hostility towards countrymen, towards foreign influence, all these different things, when the moral imagination's broken and not formed, become reasonable in the minds of the person who's corrupted options. Anti-Americanism, the source of it is irreverence born from ignorance of moral and civic posture and substance, and Americanism and malformed desire. Corrupted by what? We don't know. Could be many things, but corrupted nonetheless. Anti-Americanism, my friends, will not be fought through blind affection or insulting people or using physical force even. It will only be fought through a strong formation of the heart that is preceded by duty and then followed by that formation of the heart and then followed more generally by a strong character development that helps us understand what it means to be a citizen, helps us understand what it means to be an American, helps us understand that it's not merely positions that make us these things. It's postures and worldviews, and not merely them, but the foundations from which they are born. When we understand that, my friends, I genuinely believe that anti-Americanism, whether it be explicitly hateful and nonsense and insults, or whether it be subtle in forms that show up as friendly, show up as affectionate, but actually are not, no matter what form it takes, anti-Americanism will be the hydra that we are able to stop and slay before it can breathe fire and consume our civilization. But only if we get the right ideas, the right principles, and the right posture, and we understand the significance of what it means to be an American. You are one of the custodians and one of the harbingers of the best portion of the Enlightenment. You are a manifestation of man in the new world, divorced from artificial systems, plugged into natural and moral ones. You are a rational, sentimental, and social being, carrying within you the functions that society requires to exist in its best form. You are that as an American. And don't let anybody or anyone tell you differently. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe. If you like what you heard and you want to build with me, join the Pensive cohort. The Pensive cohort is my collection of young thinkers who are reading the philosophies and the philosophers that helped set up America before our country was even founded. And we're taking their ideas and we're applying them rigorously to the issues of our day and also in the public square. If you want to do this, if you want to be part of the restoration of this country, join the Pensive cohort. You can do that by joining our Discord, which is in the comment section down below. And if you just want to talk to me or others within the community, also please join the Discord. It helps me a lot continue to bring good content to you. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted within your soul, within your action, within your posture. Know what it means to be an American. Know what it means to love your country. And most importantly, my friends, you better stay pensive. I love all of you. Thank you so much for your time and your viewership. Have a nice one.